The snow had been falling since before midnight, and by the time Owen Briggs arrived at Hartwell General Hospital, the parking lot was buried under 6 inches of silence. He pushed through the staff entrance at 4:47 in the morning, shaking cold from his jacket collar, boots leaving wet prints across the linoleum. The hallway smelled the way it always did, antiseptic and old coffee and something underneath both that never quite had a name. He had worked this corridor for 3 years. He knew every flickering light panel, every loose tile near the supply closet, every corner where the overnight nurses gathered to breathe for 5 minutes before going back in. He was the hospital's night custodian. Building services according to his badge, floor 3, 4, and the administrative wing on alternating shifts. Nobody on the executive level had ever looked at the badge long enough to read it. His daughter Penny was 8 years old and had made him a lanyard for it out of braided yarn, red and yellow, because those were her favorite colors, and she had decided they should become his too. He wore it every shift without fail. She noticed everything, that girl. She would ask at breakfast whether he had worn it, and he would not lie to her, so he wore it. Tonight she was home with the upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Carmichael, who was 73 and kept the television on CBC all night, and never once complained when Owen knocked at midnight, asking if she could stay until morning. Penny trusted her. Owen trusted her. That was enough. He loaded his cart at the supply room and started toward the administrative corridor on the 4th floor, the one that most of the cleaning staff avoided on early shifts because the fluorescent panels buzzed, and the heating vent near the boardroom sounded like someone breathing too fast. Owen had stopped noticing both a long time ago. What he noticed instead as he turned the corner past the finance department offices was the light. The glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall was fully lit at 5 in the morning, which had never happened before. Through the panes, he could see figures moving, not pacing, not relaxed. Moving the way people move when something is slipping and they haven't told anyone yet that they can feel it going. He kept his distance, kept his cart moving at the same slow rhythm it always moved. He had learned early that the best way to remain invisible was to never change speed. Inside Hartwell General's administrative boardroom, the people who made decisions about the lives of 1,200 employees and a regional hospital serving 4 counties were in the middle of quietly catastrophic news. Dr. Patricia Stanhope, the chief executive officer, stood at the head of the table with both palms flat on the polished surface and her eyes fixed on a document that kept not changing no matter how many times she looked away and looked back. The provincial funding review had arrived 3 weeks early. The numbers inside it said Hartwell General had been operating at a structural deficit for 19 months. The numbers said the deficit had been understated in every quarterly report submitted to the board. The numbers said the Ministry of Health was now considering receivership, provincial takeover, effective within 60 days, pending a formal audit that would expose everything. The numbers said the hospital was not just struggling. The hospital was on paper already gone. Beside Patricia, the chief financial officer, a man named Gordon Fitch, was explaining in a controlled voice why the discrepancy in the quarterly projections was the result of accounting methodology, a timing issue in how deferred maintenance liabilities were being carried forward. He used words like transitional and complex modeling environment. He used the phrase within acceptable professional parameters twice in 4 minutes. Patricia had stopped listening after the first time. She had been CEO of Hartwell General for 11 years. She had kept it open through 2 funding freezes, a physician shortage, a flood in the basement imaging suite that cost $3 million to remediate. She had fought for this building the way her father had fought for his farm, not loudly, but without stopping. She was not going to sign a receivership consent form before 6 in the morning without understanding every number on every page. That was not stubbornness. That was the job. Go through the capital reserve allocation again, she said. Page 7. Gordon flipped pages without looking up. The 2 junior finance analysts, seated along the wall, exchanged a glance that lasted half a second too long. In the corridor, Owen was mopping near the doorway when a single printed sheet slid beneath the gap at the bottom of the conference room door. It happened the way things sometimes happen in hospitals, quickly, accidentally, without anyone meaning it. Someone had shifted a stack of documents, and one page had drifted to the floor and been nudged by a chair leg and ended up in the hallway. Owen moved the cart forward. The page was now near his left boot. He should have left it. A custodian had no reason to handle financial documents. If he picked it up and knocked, they would wonder how long he had been near the door. If he knocked without picking it up, they might not hear him. He could slide it back under, but the gap was too narrow going the other way. He looked at it once without meaning to, and something inside his chest went very still. The number on the page was a capital depreciation figure, equipment replacement reserve, fiscal year breakdown, submitted to the provincial auditor as part of the hospital's current asset position. Owen knew what that category meant. He had not known what it meant 3 years ago, or 6 years ago, or when he was 22 and starting his second year at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. But he had known it at 27, when he was finishing his MBA coursework and building financial risk models for a professor whose name he had not spoken out loud in years. He had not finished the degree. He had left 6 weeks before convocation when his wife Joanna was admitted to hospital with a diagnosis that changed everything downstream of it, and he had been running downstream ever since. The number on the page didn't match. He stood very still in the humming corridor and read it again. The capital replacement reserve was listed at a figure that implied a healthy equipment life cycle balance. But Owen had cleaned these floors long enough to know the equipment situation on every floor of this building. The MRI suite had been running on a maintenance contract extension for 2 years. The ventilators on the 3rd floor had been flagged in a facilities notice he had mopped past 6 months ago. The emergency generator had a repair backlog posted on the service room bulletin board that he passed every Tuesday. The stated reserve and the actual physical condition of this hospital were not the same story. If that reserve was overstated, the asset position given to the province was wrong. And if the asset position was wrong, the deficit calculation built on top of it was wrong too, potentially by enough to change what the ministry was looking at entirely. He stood there for 11 seconds. He counted them without meaning to. Then he picked up the page, raised his hand, and knocked on the boardroom door. The silence that followed the knock lasted long enough to be its own sentence. Patricia looked toward the door. Gordon did not. He was already reaching for another document, already half convinced the sound was the ventilation system, which sometimes rattled near the conference room ceiling in cold weather. The door opened 8 inches. Owen stood in the gap, one hand on the page, the other still on the cart handle. His uniform said Hartwell General, Building Services. The lanyard Penny made him was visible at his collar. He looked like exactly what he was, and he knew it, and he stepped forward anyway. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. His voice came out steadier than his heartbeat. "I found this on the floor outside, but there's something on it I think you should check before you use it." Gordon's expression moved quickly through several stages before settling on a kind of impatient incredulity. "This floor is a restricted administrative area." "I know. I'm the one who cleans it." Patricia raised one hand in Gordon's direction, a motion that meant stop without turning to look at him. Her eyes were on Owen. She had spent 11 years reading people across tables, and she was reading him now. Not his uniform, not his cart, but the particular stillness of someone who has seen something and cannot unsee it. "What did you find?" she asked. Owen stepped inside. He placed the page on the nearest corner of the table and pointed to the capital reserve line. "This figure. Equipment replacement reserve. It's listed at a level that implies a current life cycle buffer, but the physical asset condition of this building doesn't match that number. If your MRI suite is on an extension contract, your 3rd floor ventilators are flagged for service, and your emergencies generator has outstanding repairs, then this reserve is being carried at face value when the actual depreciation position is much further along." Gordon pushed back from the table slightly. "With respect, that's a facilities observation from someone who mops these floors every night," Owen said. "Yes, and reads the maintenance notices posted in the service corridors, and has been walking past the equipment status boards for 3 years. Patricia looked at the page, then at Owen, then at the page again. "If the reserve is overstated," Owen continued carefully, "then your net asset position submitted to the province is overstated, which means the deficit ratio they calculated is actually lower than what's in this review, possibly significantly lower." One of the junior analysts, a young woman named Tessa, who had been sitting so quietly she had almost ceased to exist in the room, leaned forward slightly. Patricia noticed. "Tessa," Patricia said, "run it." Gordon straightened. "Patricia, we are in the middle of a confidential." "Run it," Patricia said again, without changing her tone at all. Tessa pulled her laptop closer and began typing. The room held itself at an odd angle while she worked. Gordon too still, Patricia very focused, Owen near the door with his hands at his sides, not sure anymore whether he had just done something brave or something that was about to cost him the job that kept Penny in her school, and Mrs. Carmichael paid and the heat on in their apartment on Greenfield Avenue. Tessa stopped typing. Her face did a thing that faces do before words are ready. "The replacement reserve," she said, "is being valued at original cost minus straight-line depreciation. But if you apply actual service life reduction based on the maintenance log dates," she typed again. The current realistic value is about 31% lower. Gordon's chair made a sound as he shifted weight. Maintenance logs are operational estimates, not standard. They're time-stamped service records, Tessa said, and then stopped, clearly startled that she had interrupted him. Patricia stepped toward the laptop. "Show me." Tessa rotated the screen. The corrected figure sat there, small and patient, devastating to the argument that had been built around the number it replaced. The asset position dropped. The deficit ratio dropped with it. The picture the province had been given was not accurate, but not accurate in the direction that looked worse than reality. The reality, corrected, was measurably less catastrophic than the document currently sitting in front of a ministry official in Toronto. "How far does that move the receivership threshold?" Patricia asked. Tessa ran the calculation twice. "If this correction holds, Hartwell General is not currently in breach of the receivership trigger. You're close, but not in breach." Nobody spoke for a moment that stretched. Then Gordon said, "One reserve adjustment doesn't address 19 months of operating pressure." "No," said the second analyst, a quieter man named Paul, who had not yet said anything at all. "But it changes what the ministry thinks it's looking at. There's a difference between receivership and a structured recovery plan." Gordon looked at Owen, not with the irritation from before, with something more careful. "You work nights?" "Yes. How long have you been reading our maintenance boards?" "Since I started. I read everything I walk past. It's a habit." "What kind of habit?" Owen took a moment before answering. "The kind that comes from studying financial risk long enough to understand that operational data and balance sheet entries aren't always the same conversation." The room changed temperature slightly. Patricia turned to face him fully. "Say that again." "Asset depreciate in real time," Owen said. "Accounting schedules catch up later, or not at all, if nobody's looking at both sides of the equation. In a capital-intensive environment like a hospital, the gap between scheduled depreciation and actual asset condition can be significant, especially if maintenance has been deferred." Gordon stood. "Patricia, we need to continue this privately." Patricia didn't move. "Where did you study?" Owen looked at the snow pressing against the window outside. The city beyond it was gray and quiet. He had not talked about this at work. Not once in 3 years. "Rotman," he said finally. "MBA program. Financial risk concentration." Paul looked up from his laptop. "I didn't finish," Owen said before anyone could ask. "My wife got sick. I left to take care of her. After she died, my daughter needed consistency more than I needed credentials." No one in the room said anything for a moment that was not uncomfortable so much as full. Gordon broke it. "This is not the appropriate Gordon." Patricia's voice had gone somewhere quieter and harder. "Sit down." Gordon did not sit down, but he stopped talking, which served the same purpose. "Paul," Patricia said, "check the linked schedules. If the equipment reserve is misaligned, I want to know if the deferred maintenance liability account carries the same problem." Paul was already typing. 40 seconds passed. Then, "The deferred liability is cross-referenced to the same depreciation table. If the reserve is adjusted, this account moves too. By how much?" He ran it. Together, the two corrections shift the net position by approximately $4.2 million. Against a deficit of $19 million, that's 22%, Owen said quietly, from the side of the room where nobody had told him to stand. Everyone looked at him. 22% of the gap closes with 2-line corrections, he said. "That doesn't fix the hospital, but it changes the conversation about whether the hospital is fixable." Gordon exhaled sharply through his nose. "This is not how financial review works. You can't restructure a ministry submission based on a custodian's reading of bulletin boards and personal intuition." Owen didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The numbers on Tessa's screen were answering it already. Patricia picked up the ministry document from the table. She held it the way people hold things they are reconsidering, not threatening to put it down, but no longer entirely committed to its weight. "Who built this model?" she asked, not loudly. Gordon answered before the pause became too significant. "Finance team. Under my oversight. Standard methodology. Who approved the provincial submission?" "I did. As CFO, that's standard." "Who reviewed the asset condition data that fed into it?" A slightly longer pause. "The figures were sourced from the capital planning spreadsheet maintained by." "Who reviewed them against actual operational status?" Gordon's silence lasted 3 seconds too long to mean anything good. Patricia set the document down without signing it. She looked at Tessa, then at Paul, then, for a different kind of moment, at Owen. "Nobody leaves this floor," she said. "We go through every linked schedule before the ministry's office opens at 9. Gordon straightened. "The provincial rep is expecting confirmation of the consent form this morning." Then he waits. "Patricia, this is..." "If I send a receivership consent based on numbers that haven't been verified against physical reality." she said, voice dropping to something that didn't need volume to carry. Then I have handed this hospital to the province on a foundation that was never solid. I won't do that. She looked at Owen again. You stay. He blinked. Ma'am, I still have the third and fourth floors. Your floors just changed. Gordon looked around the table once, the way people look when they're calculating odds and finding the numbers uncomfortable. Then he folded his arms and said nothing, which was its own kind of information. What followed felt less like a financial review and more like someone slowly turning over stones to see what had been living underneath. Every linked schedule that Tessa and Paul opened revealed the same structural problem. Asset values reported to the province had been drawn from planning models that assumed scheduled depreciation rather than actual wear. The gap was not accidental looking, it had a shape, it went consistently in one direction. Paul said it first, quietly enough that it almost didn't land. These aren't methodology errors. The actual condition assessments exist in the facilities system. They're just not linked to the finance model. Tessa looked at him. They should be automatically linked. They were until 18 months ago. Someone broke the reference and replaced it with static values. Patricia's pen stopped moving. Owen, who had been standing near the wall and staying out of the way, noticed something about the timestamp on the static value entry that Paul had just opened on screen. Not the date, the time. That edit was made on a Sunday, he said. Paul checked, yes, November. 11:40 p.m., under whose login? Paul traced the credential, his typing slowed, then stopped. CFO access, he said. Gordon's expression did not collapse. It did something more controlled than that. It retreated inward, recalculated, and came back wearing a slightly different face. Finance executives routinely access systems outside business hours during audit preparation periods. That's standard practice. The original link was working correctly before that edit, Paul said carefully. The replacement values were entered manually. The correct figures were in the system. They just stopped being used. Patricia stood very slowly. Why? Gordon's answer came a beat too measured. Audit prep often requires simplified static inputs to prevent formula drift during review cycles. Owen looked at the screen differently now, not at the edit, but at what was adjacent to it, the timing, the sequence, the way the change sat inside a broader pattern of submissions. He spoke carefully, aware of every ear in the room. If the asset position was consistently overstated across 19 months of provincial reporting, and the static values were introduced manually at the start of that period, then the deficit figures submitted to the province were built on a floor that someone chose to put there. Silence. That's a significant allegation, Gordon said. It's a significant timestamp, Owen replied. Patricia looked at Gordon for a long time without speaking. Gordon looked back with the particular expression of a man who has not yet decided which version of the truth to present first. I'd like to see the access log for the 18 months prior to that edit, Patricia said. Every change to the capital and depreciation models, time-stamped and credentialed. Gordon straightened his jacket. That kind of internal audit should go through proper HR and legal channels. Tessa, Patricia said. Pull it. Tessa pulled it. It took 4 minutes. When the log appeared on screen, the room became very quiet in a way that meant something had shifted that couldn't be shifted back. The same credentials, the same Sunday night pattern. 6 entries over 14 months, each one adjusting a reference point that would, in aggregate, paint a picture of a hospital further from financial recovery than the operational data actually supported. Paul said, voice low, if these values had remained correctly linked, the last 3 provincial reviews would have shown a deficit trending lower, not higher. The recovery trajectory was already there. It just wasn't being shown. Patricia picked up the ministry document again. She held it differently this time, not like something she was about to sign, like something she was about to put down for the last time. Who benefits, she said, not quite a question, from Hartwell General appearing less recoverable than it is? Nobody answered immediately, but Owen had been turning a different piece of the picture for the last several minutes. He had been thinking about something Gordon had mentioned early in the meeting, before Owen knocked, something he had overheard in the corridor while his cart was still moving. A name, a firm. Who is Prescott Advisory Group? He asked. The quality of Gordon's silence changed. Paul typed the name into the procurement system, signed 16 months ago, operational restructuring advisory services. Value? Patricia asked. Invoice total $8.4 million, deliverables? Paul scrolled. Tessa looked over his shoulder. They both stopped at the same place. No deliverables attached to file, Tessa said. Patricia set the ministry document flat on the table. Gordon. What did Prescott Advisory Group deliver? Gordon's first word was the name of a process. His second sentence was about the complexity of restructuring engagements. His third was about confidential strategic work product. He was building something out of language, but it had no foundation anymore. Prescott Advisory Group, Paul said slowly, still reading from the screen, was incorporated in Ontario 14 months ago. The registered director is listed as a numbered holding company. He clicked further. The numbered company's address of record matches the legal offices of Meridian Health Capital. Patricia turned her head. Meridian Health Capital. Paul nodded without looking up. They're a private healthcare infrastructure fund. They acquire distressed regional hospitals and convert them to for-profit models. The room understood what that sentence meant before anyone said another word. If Hartwell General entered provincial receivership, a period of administrative uncertainty and institutional vulnerability would follow. An experienced infrastructure fund, positioned in advance with advisory relationships already inside the hospital. That fund would be very well placed to present itself as a solution. $8.4 million in unexplained consulting fees, paid to a firm connected to a company that stood to acquire the hospital at distressed prices. Patricia looked at Gordon the way people look at something they should have seen sooner and cannot explain why they didn't. "You are suspended pending legal review," she said. "Effective now. Leave your access card." Gordon adjusted his jacket one more time. The gesture looked strange now, like an old habit operating inside a moment it no longer fit. "Patricia, you need to think about what you are implying. This hospital is in genuine distress. I was finding it solutions. You were finding someone else a purchase opportunity," she said, "using our employees' jobs as the price." Gordon's expression went somewhere colder. He looked once at Owen, standing near the wall in his custodian uniform, the braided lanyard visible at his collar. The look held something Owen had seen before in other rooms, from other people who had decided his presence in a serious situation was the most implausible part of what had gone wrong for them. "You're telling me this institution is making governance decisions based on accurate numbers," Patricia said, "which is what governance decisions are supposed to be based on." Security arrived 6 minutes later. Gordon left the room without drama and without looking back, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had. The remaining people in the boardroom, Patricia, Tessa, Paul, Owen, and 2 members of legal counsel who had arrived quietly during the last 40 minutes, spent the next hour rebuilding the hospital's actual financial position from the operational data that had been sitting in the facilities system all along, correctly recorded, simply disconnected from the documents being shown to the province. It was not comfortable work. The hospital was still in serious difficulty. The funding pressure was real. 19 months of operational deficit did not disappear because the asset position had been misrepresented. But the picture that emerged was a hospital that had a path, that had options, that was not dead before noon if someone was willing to fight for it. Patricia fought for it. She was on the phone with the ministry's regional director by 8:15, before the formal office hours began, because she had his cell number from a conference in Halifax 2 years ago, and she had never needed it until now. She told him the provincial review contained material inaccuracies, and that she was requesting a pause on receivership proceedings pending corrected data submission. She told him there was an ongoing internal investigation into financial reporting practices and that legal counsel was already engaged. She did not tell him a night custodian had started all of it, not because she was ashamed of that detail, because that conversation was going to take longer than a phone call and she wanted to have it properly. Owen stood near the window while she spoke, watching snow fall on the parking lot 6 stories below. He could see his car from here, a 10-year-old Civic with a cracked front bumper and a sticker on the rear window that Penny had put there without asking. A yellow sun with a face, slightly crooked, which he had decided was fine because she had been proud of it. He thought about her waking up at Mrs. Carmichael's, eating cereal, watching the morning news programs she was inexplicably fascinated by. He thought about the medication form that was due at her school today, the one he had signed last night on the kitchen counter while she was in the bath. It was in his jacket pocket. He would need to drop it at the school office by noon. Mr. Briggs. He turned. Patricia had ended the call. The room was quieter now. Tessa and Paul were still at their laptops, cross-referencing documents. Legal counsel was in a side conversation near the door. "The ministry is pausing," Patricia said. "They want a corrected submission within 5 business days with full supporting documentation and an independent verification of the asset data." Owen nodded. "That's manageable. If you use the facility's time-stamped records as primary source and cross-verify with the service contracts, you can build a defensible valuation in 2 days." Patricia studied him for a moment the way she had studied him from the beginning, without condescension but with focus. "How certain are you about what you saw in those numbers?" "Certain enough to knock," he said. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Quieter than that. The ministry director asked me who found the error, she said. Owen waited. I told him it was an internal audit flag, which is accurate. She paused. I'd like it to be more accurate than that in the final report. You can put my name on whatever you need to. That's not what I'm asking. Patricia set down the document she was holding and moved to stand closer to the window where he was. Outside, the snow had shifted from falling to drifting. I'm asking whether you'd be willing to stay past your shift. I need to get a form to Penny's school by noon. We can have someone deliver it. She needs to see me pick her up at 3, then you leave at 3. Patricia paused. And tomorrow. Owen looked at her carefully. I sweep floors. You also just stopped this hospital from entering receivership on false numbers. Those two things can be true at the same time. What are you asking? Patricia turned to face him properly. I'm asking you to come back tomorrow. And the day after. Not as building services, as something we don't have a title for yet, because we've never had to have it before. Someone who reads the operational reality of this building and tells finance when the two stories have stopped matching. Owen thought about that. Penny's school schedule doesn't change. It doesn't have to, and her sick days are your sick days. He looked out at the parking lot again, at the Civic with the crooked sun sticker, healthcare coverage for both of us. Current building services plan expires in 6 weeks matched. Better, actually. There are 12 people on the overnight cleaning team, Owen said. Most of them are supporting families on wages that haven't moved in 4 years. If you have budget room to fix one thing about how this institution treats its people, start there before you start with me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's not a small ask. No, Owen agreed. It isn't. She looked at him steadily. Done. I'll take it to the board compensation committee with a recommendation. It'll take a few weeks, but it'll happen. A pause. And you? Owen thought about Joanna, who had believed in the work he was doing at Rotman before he ever believed in it himself, who had read his risk modeling papers in the hospital room during her second round of treatment and told him they were too good to leave unfinished, who had also told him in a later room, a quieter one, that Penny was too important to leave untended while he chased the proof of what he already knew. He had been trying ever since to believe that both things could still be true. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. Patricia nodded once. That was all. She was already turning back to the table, already in the next thing, the way people are when they are used to carrying weight and have learned to keep moving while they do it. Owen took his cart back to the supply room. He washed the mop heads and hung them properly, the way he always did, because someone would use them on the next shift and it mattered to leave things right. He signed out through building services at 9:52 in the morning, 4 hours and change past the end of his shift. He called Mrs. Carmichael from the elevator. She's been asking about you since 7, Mrs. Carmichael said. I told her you were busy making things right. She accepted that very seriously. Owen stepped out into the snow. The cold was sharp after hours inside, and he stood at the edge of the parking lot for a moment, letting it settle around him before he walked to the car. Above him, the fourth-floor windows caught the morning light coming through the cloud break. Somewhere behind those windows, 2 analysts were rebuilding a financial picture that was going to give 1,200 people a reason to come to work tomorrow. He drove to Penny's school. She was in class, so he went to the office and handed in the medication form himself and exchanged 2 sentences with the secretary who recognized him as the dad who always dropped things off slightly late but never forgot. Then he sat in the car in the school parking lot for a while, not quite ready to go home yet. Not sure what to do with the feeling that something had shifted in his life in the hours before dawn without making any noise at all. At 3:04 that afternoon, the school doors opened and Penny came down the steps in her orange coat, backpack listing to one side as always, and she stopped at the bottom when she saw him because he was usually later than this. You're early, she said. Big day. She came down the last 2 steps and studied his face the way she sometimes did. Not quite reading it, but checking it, making sure the parts were all still there. Did something happen at the hospital? Something happened. Good something or bad something. She had crouched down to zip her collar because she had left it open in 7-degree weather, the same way she always did, the same argument they had every November. Good something, I think. It's still being sorted out. Penny let him zip it. Did you fix something? He thought about the page on the corridor floor. The number that hadn't belonged. The knock on a door at 5 in the morning that had felt like the most frightening and most obvious thing he had ever done at the same time. I noticed something, he said. Other people fixed it. She accepted this with the calm seriousness as she applied to most things he told her. Then she reached up and straightened the braided lanyard at his collar, red and yellow, slightly twisted from a long night, and patted it once with her small hand, satisfied. Good, she said. Let's go home. He took her backpack. They walked to the car together through snow that had gone soft in the afternoon light, and above the tree line the sky had opened into the particular pale blue that comes over Canadian cities in late autumn when the clouds finally break and the cold turns clean and everything, for a moment, looks like it might be all right.